Hello, and welcome to this lecture on the causes of the Age of Exploration, the big factors that played a role in Europeans going out to the world, looking for Asia, stumbling into North, Central, and South America and the Caribbean, and then pretty much changing the course of history with their actions. So we're going to focus on this for the rest of the unit. We're going to look at the causes in this lecture, then we'll look at the effects in the next, and then we'll look at how the economy of Europe began to change as well. This goes pretty much hand in hand with the other parts of this unit. It's happening alongside the warfare of the 13 and 1400s, the Ottoman Empire's growth, the Renaissance, the printing press, all that stuff is happening alongside, as you can see with this timeline up here. So let's get into it. So looking at the causes in this lecture, one of the biggest causes is the change in technology we see. We see technology and the different developments that happen in the 13, 14, and 1500s really lend itself to enhancing the age of exploration, really allowing it to grow in this period. So, with the Renaissance and Europe's connection with Asia, we see this connection really kind of foster the growth and development for an age of exploration. We see, of course, gunpowder and guns really contribute to this process and add to, Europeans being able to militarily dominate the natives of North America, South America, and the Caribbean, and Central America. Guns were not invented in Europe. Gunpowder was invented in China, but gunpowder eventually made its way to Europe, and we see its introduction in warfare in the 13, 14, 1500s, more or less. And when we see Columbus go over from Europe to the Western Hemisphere in 1492, his fellow Europeans that kind of follow in his footsteps are able to easily scare, debilitate, and conquer indigenous Americans with guns and gunpowder. How are they able to get over there? New ships, primarily the Portuguese caravel. Europe was really searching for access to the Indian Ocean trade routes, which we're going to talk about in a second, which spanned from the coast of eastern Africa all the way to the Indian subcontinent in Indonesia, which really was the goal of Europeans. They really wanted to get over there somehow, and we'll talk about that more in a second. But the Portuguese, who did make some headwinds and made their way over there, were really inspired by the ships they saw in the Indian Ocean trade networks. And this allowed them to design the caravel, which had new types of sails and rudders and steers, which allowed them to, latch onto winds easier and navigate through the ocean currents easier as well. In this period, like I said, the printing press was a big contributor. We see knowledge of ships, knowledge of people like Ptolemy, and other ancient geographers and their knowledge of ships. We see the printing press able to print maps more accurately and kind of recreate and reprint those maps more accurately. You're more likely to get a better copy of a map when you can just use a printing press to print it rather than hand drawing it, and that's what we see here. These old ancient maps, I shouldn't say ancient, but these old maps are called portolani. That's what we see here, and it's not too inaccurate. This map right here looks pretty accurate to what we would see today. Of course, you see, Portugal, Spain, Italy, Great Britain over here, and the northern half of Africa right here wasn't too inaccurate. This one over here, a little bit less accurate, but still, these reproductions and these reprintings allowed Europeans to kind of be better navigators, to kind of follow the coasts better, because that's what a lot of this early sailing was. It was not, going across the ocean. It was following coasts and kind of keeping track of those coasts. New technology we see the astrolabe and the compass. Again, the compass is another invention from China. A lot of these were inspired by China or Asian Asian nations. The astrolabe, which came, I believe, from the Middle East, but these tools helped Europeans navigate and make their way across the ocean and sail on the seas to get to their destination. We know how the compass works. It points north towards location, usually like the North Pole or something like that. At least modern compasses do. The astrolabe allows you to point this part of the device at a star, usually like the North Star or something like that, and then it kind of tells you where you are as far as latitude goes. So it kind of helps you sail in a straight line, a straight latitudinal line, as you would like it to. At least that's my understanding of it. I'm not an expert sailor or anything. Finally, going along with that knowledge of maps and latitude is the knowledge of wind patterns. Knowing the currents and how wind patterns formed and how they flew and how they went across the ocean really allowed Europeans to kind of take advantage of it. The Portuguese, again, we're going to talk about them a lot today. They were they picked up on this idea of winds flowing from one part of Europe to another or across the ocean, and allowed them to get from the part of the Iberian Peninsula to these different islands out here, to Madeira, the Azores, and places like that, and eventually along the coast of Africa. Eventually, other explorers are going to be able to use those related wind patterns to make it across the ocean. You can make it across the ocean not by rowing, which would be impossible at this point in time, but by wind, which can power you and push you across the ocean, and also help you return by following the parallel wind patterns. So why did Europeans want to go across the ocean in the first place? Well, it wasn't their first destination. They wanted to originally go to Asia, and like I said in the last slide, Europeans wanted to make it to this lucrative Indian Ocean trading network, which again spanned from Eastern Africa and the Middle East, all the way through India, Southeast Asia, Indonesia, China, and Japan. The goods in Asia were top tier ever since, we're going to talk about in a second, Marco Polo's travels and him writing about it. And again, now with the printing press, more people can get their hands on Marco Polo's writings and his stories. These trade goods were just so desirable for Europeans. You have cloth, you have cotton, you have silk, you have sugar, you have spices, you have tea, you have porcelain. You have all these textiles and luxury items that just dwarf what you have available in Europe. There's no spices in Europe. There's no tea. There's no coffee. There's no sugar. You're wearing wool, maybe, is your main source of clothing material. Asia just had all of these luxurious items, which, especially if you're a rich person, a merchant, a noble, you're going to want these things, especially when you see them. Peasants, which again, most of Europe, 95% of Europe was a peasant, you're not going to really know or care about these things at this point in time. It's out of your mind, out of your league. But this Indian Ocean trade, which is so desirous and so wanted by the rich and powerful of Europe. Now, the problem is, there's really no ship that can get over here. Before this period, you couldn't really make it around the coast. So if you knew about this trading network, in this Indian Ocean trading network, and you're a rich person in Europe, your only option is to go through the Italian city-states, which we'll talk about in a second. But the Italian city-states, put tons of taxes and tons of fees on this process because it was a very, at times, difficult, dangerous, expensive process. But then in 1453, when the Byzantine Empire collapses and we see Constantinople taken over by the Ottomans, this trading process becomes more difficult, more expensive, and pretty much more impossible. So it's no coincidence that 1453 occurs, the Ottomans make their entrance into Europe, and the fees for access to this trade network just go through the roof. Then we see 40 years later, we see Europeans start to make much more serious attempts to get over to Asia. One trading network that did exist that was pretty impactful and important prior to 1492 was the Hanseatic League. Here we see ranging from England all the way to parts of what we would consider modern Russia today, but really focusing on what we call modern Germany or the Netherlands today, or Denmark. We see lots of trade in Northern Europe. This is where lots of people did make lots of money. And this was important because it didn't require going through the Italians or the Ottomans or dealing with either of those people, which again, most of Europe was not fond of the Italians or the Ottomans because they charged an arm and a leg to get fees, or in the case of the Ottoman Empire, they weren't Christian. They were, Muslim invaders, which were, and therefore hated by all of Christian Europe. So again, this trading situation was begun because of luxury goods and economic reasons, but other factors do play a role in it, which we will explore as well. One last point to know is that we see the growth and development of mercantilism. Mercantilism is going to be the dominant economic system in Europe up until the Enlightenment French Revolution period. It's really foreign to what we would consider today, but it is kind of a predecessor of capitalism. It stands for merchant capitalism. But with mercantilism, you see a mother country wanting to kind of collect as much gold, silver, and metal currencies, as much of that as possible. The richer you are, the more powerful you are. The more gold you have, the better country you are. So your goal is to get wealth and power. This means you want to limit trading, because if you trade with other countries, that could allow them to get gold, silver, etc., and challenge you for power. So you establish colonies which only trade with you, only work with you, and just give you gold or resources that you can then turn into goods and sell, or you could sell those resources to other countries. Your goal is to not do some sort of trade system that we have today, where we trade food to one nation, another nation gives us microchips or something like that. Free market capitalism, that is not in existence. It's accumulating currencies, gold, and therefore power. So economic factors were definitely in play, getting those resources, finding access to the Asian Indian Ocean trading market. But culture was also a very big problem, especially after it got started. Again, most of Europe was very Christian, very religious, very, devout Christians. Life was so tough that if you, life was so tough it was very easy for you to die. And if, the wrong thing happens and you get an accident, there's a very good chance of that happening, a very good chance of you going into the afterlife. So Europeans were very focused on the afterlife, very focused with death, very preoccupied with those things too. So they're always thinking about religion, and spreading religion, spreading Christianity particularly, could be a way for you to save yourself, save your soul, and honor your God, honor your church, honor your rulers, who would want to then maybe bestow riches on you, or in the case of religion, maybe give you a better afterlife, send you to heaven. And this is definitely in the case of this is in the mind of Europeans, and it does not leave. You can see with this quote right here with Christopher Columbus, he's writing to the new monarchs of Spain, Ferdinand and Isabella, writing to them that they're looking to he's looking to attack the enemies of Christianity, which in this case are Muslims that follow Islam. Remember, Ferdinand and Isabella just completed the Reconquista, kicking the last Muslims out of Granada, and securing Spain and the Iberian Peninsula for Christendom. But here we see, and Columbus makes reference to that as well, but here we see him stating, and he stated a lot of things. He explained himself in many ways, but he's doing what he's doing. He's sailing across the ocean to secure new lands and people for Christianity. He is their servant, but he's also a servant of God. He is saying with this quote. And we do see this throughout the years. This really doesn't stop in this class. That Europeans went out to the world and tried to spread their religion, which 99% of the time was Christianity or Catholicism. That does not stop, and they are successful. If you look at Central and South America today, very Christian, very Catholic. The Philippines, very Christian, very Catholic. And you have, many parts of Africa as well, Christian, Catholic, etc. Now, parts of Africa, they were, Christian just as long as Europeans are, and sometimes, in some cases, like such as with Ethiopia, they were Christian before Europe was. But that's a different story. A couple things with this rationale, as far as religion being an important factor. While religion was important, race and superiority, race and racial superiority does come into play. It is not a motivating factor for this period of colonialism. You might remember from ninth grade talking about white man's burden and, the civilizing mission of Europeans going into Africa, further into Africa or Asia, and trying to civilize these quote unquote, savages and people like that. That is not as in play here. There are components of that. We see the slave trade start in this period, which definitely becomes based on race and racial superiority. In this period in time, in the 14, 15, 1600s, even going into the 1700s, that's just not as big of a factor. Now, again, I'm not saying that racial superiority didn't have any place in this system. It definitely did, and it increased over time. But I'm just saying the white man's burden and that whole thing is not quite in play yet. It's more of a religious thing. We need to civilize, in some cases, civilize these indigenous people. In some cases, not, because some people believe you couldn't you couldn't Christian make a indigenous person a Christian because that meant you couldn't enslave them or work them to death. So it's definitely here. Culture and religion and race are definitely here. And natives and Africans were definitely subjugated because of their skin color or because of they weren't European. But the white man's burden is not a main motivating factor. It's more of like an after effect. We're going to treat you like this because you're not a white European. Other causes, just kind of hitting off a few things here. I've talked about a few of these, so I won't spend as much time on them. But the Portuguese, we're not really going to talk about the Portuguese a lot in this class. We're going to talk about them now, though. The Portuguese truly did serve a leadership role in Europe when it comes to, leading this expansionist exploration charge in which Europeans, kind of started to take over the rest of the world. One such person really helped us along was Prince Henry the Navigator. He was one of the younger princes of a king, or one of the younger brothers of a king. He was never going to be king, so he had a really, I guess in Portugal's eyes, he had a really fortuitous, thought system that really pushed Portugal and then, other parts of Europe into really looking at sailing and ocean going and navigating. He believed that in order to spread Christianity as well as you could, in order to get access to riches, wealth, and gold, Europeans needed to get out of this mindset of just going through Italy or through the Mediterranean to trade. You really needed to go around Africa and use all the technology and knowledge that you have to get around Africa and get to other parts of the world. And he really pushed this. He funded schools and training systems that really trained a series of sailors and navigators to make their way around Africa and throughout the rest of the world. And the Portuguese really were some of the most knowledgeable sailors of this period. Again, though, why did we see people wanting to go out and get to the Asian trade markets? People like Marco Polo. People wanting access to that trade network that just had tons of really awesome, unique goods. Marco Polo's stories really inspire navigators and adventurers to want to get out there, and we do see that happen. Again, with 1453, when the Ottomans take over Constantinople, we do see hatred of the Ottomans, hatred of Muslims, hatred of the Italians who are, just taxing these expensive Asian goods. We see European nobles and rich people who can fund these journeys really search for a way around this bottleneck, around this monopoly that the Italian city-states had. And that way was, around the Mediterranean, around Africa, which again, Spain and Portugal, with their geographic location, are poised to send ships out that can, circumvent the geographic advantage that the Italians and other Mediterranean traders had. Of course, there's the new monarchs. This period, people believe you could, gain glory by discovering land or by seizing land, not just for your kingdom, but for your religion as well. And Ferdinand and Isabella are hip to this. They realize that, you know, this can be a good thing if Spain gets more land, because it'll make them more powerful, make their new kingdom more powerful, and ultimately please God if they can also turn a lot of those people living in that land towards Christianity. When you get more resources and things like that, you can bring that back to Spain and increase the size of your military, your state, and things like that. In the last lecture, we talked about new monarchs wanting to centralize and strengthen their nations and kind of start on the pathway to become modern nation states. This gold and these resources from exploration can really help with that. Printing press, of course, is important too. One last thing, we've talked about a lot of reasons. You can kind of summarize them in the 3 G's. God, gold, and then glory. Glory, in addition to, wanting to become a famous, monarch and have a big empire, or a famous trader and make lots of money. There was a class of Europeans that really didn't have a lot going on. If you're the second, third, fourth born, noble or something like that, kind of like a Prince Henry here, you can make a name for yourself by going out and exploring, especially if you kind of come from a shady background or you've done some shady things, which many conquistadors did. So glory is the 3rd G. You can go out and you can make a name for yourself by discovering modern Mexico or discovering a new path to Asia, which, many Europeans thought they did or tried to do. So these conquistadors, these people that went out and tried to conquer land and quote unquote discover land that was, undiscovered in their eyes at least. Of course, we know it wasn't. There's people living there. They thought they could really become famous and powerful and well known and well connected if they went out and accomplished these feats. And that's really what inspired a lot of these people. If you weren't the firstborn son of a noble family, you were not going to get the noble land. You were not going to become a super important noble or an advisor to a king. You're going to waste away and maybe join a monastery and become a monk or something like that. Who wants to do that, right? So a lot of these conquistadors did this, and they went out. Many of them lived short, violent deaths because it's really tough transversing across the ocean and doing these violent takeovers. So many of them did not succeed in their goal and their path for glory, but they did bring glory for their nations they represented and for their patrons and the merchants that kind of funded these journeys. All right. So hopefully you kind of understand some of the causes for the Age of Exploration. Next lecture we'll look at some of the effects. So I will catch you next time.